Hello, I'm Brandon, and I want to tell you about the best cheesecake I've ever had in my life. And I'm putting best and cheesecake both in quotes intentionally for reasons you will find out later. It's a bit of a longer story, but I promise if you stick with it, it'll pay off in the end with the twist. So, some context. I love cheesecake. I'm not revealing any dessert secrets here. My dad used to make a cheesecake when I was a kid. It had like Oreo fluff on the top with cherries, great stuff. My brother is a chef. He made 12 different cheesecakes for his wedding. 12 different ones. That's how much we love cheesecake. Maybe it's genetic. I don't know. But 15 or 16 years ago, my friend comes to me and says, "Hey, my grandmother makes the greatest cheesecake in the world. If you like cheesecake, you should try some of this cheesecake because everyone who has it loves it and they don't stop talking about it. They recommend it to everyone else. It's just the greatest cheesecake ever made." Now I'm thinking, I love all of the food that my grandmother made. I think that's the same with a lot of people. And a lot of people say, my grandmother makes the best X kind of food. So, like, I believe that person believes that. Do I trust them? I don't. But they keep telling me about it. And so eventually I'm like, okay, I've got to try this cheesecake. They convinced me. Now, the thing is, to get this cheesecake, there's a catch. The cheesecake is available at the lunch potluck at her grandmother's church after the church service, a few hours away. So I have to go visit their grandmother, go with church to them to experience this cheesecake. So there's kind of a catch there, but like I trust this person at the time, so I'm like, okay. Her family is telling me about it. They're like, yeah, it's the greatest cheesecake in the world. You got to have some of it. So we get the schedules worked out. Time comes, and I go to the church service. And before the service starts, I'm meeting people from her family, friends, relatives, whatever, who live in that area. And they're all saying, like, oh, you got to have her grandmother's cheesecake. It's just the best cheesecake I've ever had in my life. It'll change your life. It's an incredible cheesecake. It's just this ridiculously great cheesecake. No one makes cheesecake like it. And even the pastor, I meet him before the service, and he says that this cheesecake was God sent. So if I'm in some sort of RPG, this is like a legendary item I'm trying to acquire, which is already kind of what I'm doing. I've traveled a great distance. I'm infiltrating a group of people to have this cheesecake. Now, I've met her grandmother, and she's super nice. So I assume she makes good food. We'll see what happens. She's a grandmother. So we get through the service, and I don't have much to say about that. I'm not a church-going person, but the guy was doing the usual stuff. He told some stories I had already heard before, analogies and stuff to prove a point about some sort of biblical lesson. Doesn't matter. So we get to the church potluck. It's in the church basement, and there's a lot of grandma food there, like a lot of homemade, home cooked grandma food. So I'm loading up. There was this really incredible like green bean casserole which I love already, but this is the Midwest variant, which some people may not have had before. It's got a jar of cheese whiz in it. Some people, not everyone's used to that, but it's really good. This was that kind, loved it very much. And the whole time, people at the potluck, they're like, oh, really looking forward to dessert. Gonna have some of this cheesecake. Gotta have this woman's cheesecake. And I'm like really hyped up for it. I think it's amazing. So we get done with like the main course, as it were, and just hanging out, waiting for food to digest a little bit. We get to the dessert round, and there's a dessert table. There's some really amazing looking cakes and other like dessert items, pastries, and things, all homemade by veterans of grandma cooking wars, right? Like good stuff. But there's the cheesecake there, and people are lining up and they want that specific cheesecake. Now I'm in line, I'm going to get a piece, so I'm not too worried about it. So people are getting their pieces. It comes to me, and I see it, so it's revealed, and it does. It looks great. It looks great. She's done the thing where there's like a whipped cream on the top, and she's taken like I don't know, like a creme brulee torch, or maybe just put it in the oven again for a little bit and just broiled the top, where it's a little brown on the whipped cream and it gets a little crispy on the edges, but it looks good. But that means that I can't see what the cheesecake looks like, and I think we can all agree that cheesecake has a certain color. It's like white, whitish yellow, a little more on the yellow side than white, right? Like we can all agree on what most cheesecake looks like. That's not an issue there. So I have this piece of cheesecake on a plate. I'm going to the table. I sit down at the table. Now it's my friend and her family members and some other, friends, distant relatives and stuff who live in this area with her grandmother. And her grandmother is there. And they are all looking at me. So I'm sidetracked. I'm looking at them. Now they're already eating the cheesecake and loving it. They're all talking. They're like, "This is so good." Like this church basement is full of like food orgasm sounds now. Just like, oh, this cheesecake, it's so good. So like it's all hyped for me, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be an incredible moment in my life. Like I'm going to segment my life by before I had this cheesecake and after I had this cheesecake. It's so good, right? So I'm ready. I've got it in my fork. I've got a bite, and I put it in my mouth, and it's on my tongue, and I start to taste it. And I'm trying not to react. And here's what was happening in my mind. I had a lot of thoughts. One was betrayal, another one confusion. A lot of confusion. Like what is this supposed to be? Because I'm not tasting cheesecake, right? And then the other things, like I'm not tasting cheesecake, right? And I'll tell you in a moment what it is I'm tasting. And I'm thinking there's a lot of options here. A lot of people don't want to be mean to a grandmother making cheesecake, so all these people are just going along with it. This is the greatest cheesecake in the world. Okay, it's a fun gag. But why rope a whole bunch of other people, especially people from a couple hours away into this charade? Um, and then my other thought is like, okay, is this a recruitment tool for the church? Is this like when they put a skateboard on a teen night flyer? So you show up to the church and then there's no skateboards. They just tell you about Bible verses, something like that. Is the pastor in on it? Is this how they recruit people to the church? Is this incredible cheesecake legend that they have built up for themselves? And then another thing occurred to me. Maybe these people have never had cheesecake before. Maybe that's it. Maybe she was the first person to bring cheesecake to them. And so they think this is what cheesecake is because what is in my mouth isn't cheesecake. And here's where it gets off and here's what I'm tasting in my mouth and what I want to communicate to you is that we all agree cheesecake has some very basic ingredients and they have to have those ingredients to be a cheesecake. Doesn't have to be the best cheesecake in the world, but to be a cheesecake you got to have cream cheese, eggs, sugar, flour, maybe that at a minimum, maybe you throw in some vanilla extract, maybe some other stuff, but that's like the minimum stuff you need for a good cheesecake. And then also you get a pie crust. Now you can store bought pie crust, make your own, whatever. I don't think it matters so much. Store bought pie crust is going to taste great. Doesn't matter at all. All of these things are flashing through my head as this bite of cheesecake is in my mouth, right? Because what I'm tasting is not all of those ingredients together. I'm tasting one of those ingredients. Her grandmother took a pie crust, a store bought pie crust, filled it with one key cheesecake ingredient: cream cheese. It's just a pie crust full of cream cheese. And then it has whipped cream over the top. And that's what everybody is eating, like an insane person, is just these big helpings of cream cheese. That's the only thing in it. And I'm looking at it now, like when I have the slice in front of me, because I couldn't see because the whipped cream on the top, and it's just white. And it's just cream cheese. Now look, I don't have any problem with cream cheese. I eat cream cheese. I don't often eat it by itself, but I certainly don't take it, put it in a pie tin, and take a giant bite out of it, right? Like, this isn't what people normally do, right? People don't do that. So, this is why it is stuck in my mind. And so, afterwards, I'm talking to people because I'm trying to figure out, like, what are the options here? Like, I went over, like, there's many possibilities here, and it's the last option. They all believe this is what cheesecake is. It's like they've been totally it's like they've been totally sheltered to believe that this is what cheesecake is, and no other cheesecake has entered their realm. Honestly, it's like a big metaphor for the church protecting you from things. Really, is what it turns out to be. But it's just cheesecake. So again, best cheesecake in the world I've ever had that I will never forget was just a pie crust full of cream cheese. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you stuck this long, I'm a comedian based in St. Louis. Like and follow for more stupid stories I've had a really dumb life, and I turn 40 next week, so there's more to come.